about Chaplayev and Memento and shape expression and Ferber flavors. And maybe it's about time to step back for a little and think about what we're all here and think about how this connects to the broader strategy of what we're doing. And it is my pleasure to introduce Katherine Maher, the Executive Director of the Wikimedia Foundation, who kindly agreed to give our closing keynote today. Catherine's been flying across the planet, floating. I don't know how you made it, but you're here. So I'm really glad that we have you here. And without further ado, give her Katherine Maher.
It wasn't that far. I woke up in New York. Thank you all for being here. I hear you have been warmed up and are perhaps a little punchy from a long day, so the bar is low for me to impress you, because everything's probably going to sound good because I'm the one standing between you and social and drinks and all of that. So it is great to be here, and I am delighted that this is actually the third Wikicite conference. It's really exciting. I remember when this all got off the ground. I'm sure you have been welcomed many times, but welcome again to California, welcome to the Bay Area, welcome to the David Brower Center, whatever your sort of concentric circle of local is, welcome, we're happy to have you. I am here today to talk a little bit about, what you come here to discuss and do is pretty exciting, creating a structured database of citations. The reason it's exciting to me is that it's something that we could have only imagined 5 years ago. But over the course of those last few years, new social technical resources have arisen, making it easier and more actually possible for us to potentially achieve this goal. The community and the software of Wikidata, the project that I'm sure you've been talking a lot about, has begun to make this a reality. And for me at least, Wikidata is increasingly critical to the way that the world processes knowledge and perhaps the very future of the Wikimedia projects themselves. So I want to talk a little bit today about Wikimedia as the essential infrastructure of free knowledge, what that means to us at the Wikimedia Foundation, what that might mean for the Wikimedia movement's future, for our future as creators and curators of knowledge, and how you all are helping create this particular vision with Wikicite, what Wikicite's role is within this. So I'm going to go back a little bit. I like to do this even when speaking to very sophisticated and experienced crowds, because I never know who the newbie is in a room. 5 years ago, it was me. And so I want to take a look at how we started and how we got here, and then examine perhaps a little bit of the places we need to go. Oops. So 2001, Wikipedia started as the online encyclopedia that anyone could edit. You probably know this globe. Today, of course, Wikipedia is the largest collaboratively built encyclopedia in the history of humankind. I actually think of it as much more than an encyclopedia. It is the largest collection of human-built corpora of knowledge in one place. It contains around 49 million articles in roughly 300 languages. And fancy, there you go, 49 million articles in roughly 300 languages. Didn't realize this had fancy features. And every single month, 10 million edits are made to Wikimedia's projects by about, a quarter of a million users, so 250,000 users. And all of the content in the Wikimedia projects is accessed around 15 billion page views a month. So it's quite large. That makes it the 5th most popular website on the planet, really built by the world and increasingly in sort of new places in the world and with new functions. So we talk about all of these edits that happen around the course of the Wikimedia projects. About, I believe, half of them, give or take in a given month, actually now come from Wikidata. So it's not just Wikipedia, it's the whole Wikimedia ecosystem. And then speaking of Wikidata, of course, it's not just Wikipedia that is the backbone of the Wikimedia community's work. So while Wikipedia itself has about 49 million articles, Wikimedia Commons actually has 50 million freely licensed media files, and Wikidata has around 50 million structured data statements, which means that the other Wikimedia projects are quite equivalent to Wikipedia in terms of creating richness and depth of knowledge. As I mentioned, we are quite popular. In the course of any given month, we receive visits from about 1.5 billion monthly unique devices, because Wikipedia The Wikimedia projects have very strict privacy policies. I can't tell you exactly how many people that is because we just don't know. But we do estimate it's quite a lot, and quite a lot from all over the world. So we know that the work that Wikimedia does really does have a significant, measurable, quantitative impact. And it's built by a truly global community. So a global community with active affiliates on every populated continent, and we know we've had edits from even some unpopulated continents, hundreds of chapters, user groups, and informal networks that contribute the pieces to the construction of our collective knowledge base. And the guiding vision for all of it is a world in which every single human can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. So everyone has their lens through which they interpret this. For me personally, I see three parts in this statement, and a fourth part that's missing. The first part is that it's every single human being, which means that every single human being on the planet should be able to access Wikimedia and participate in Wikimedia. It also is a world in which every single human can share. For me, that means it's not just about consumption, it's also about participation. It's about the ability to, yes, partake in knowledge and partake of knowledge rather than just to consume knowledge. And it is all knowledge. So it's a really inclusive vision of what knowledge actually is, of which, to me at least, the encyclopedia is a part, but not necessarily the whole as it is represented today. And we're going to talk a little bit more also about what exists within the Wikimedia projects versus what does not currently exist when we think about all knowledge. And then the fourth part for me that isn't actually stated explicitly here, is that it says nothing about Wikimedia. It just says this is the world that we want to be in, this is the world that we want to get to. And so for me, there's an unstated, implicit invitation for many, many others to be part of this journey. So in 2018, Wikipedia has in many ways moved now from beyond being sort of a weird community project that could never possibly work, so that would work only in practice but not in theory, as they like to say, and hopefully a little bit beyond sort of its initial adversarial relationship with librarians and other scholars, to being something that really has a very important place in the way that we think about knowledge in the world. Today, Wikipedia currently ranks among the world's top 10 sites for scholarly resource lookups. We know from our friends at Crossref that Wikipedia currently accounts for a very large share of lookups for digital object identifiers, the unique identifiers used in scholarly literature. And if we look only at the field of medicine, our best estimates indicate that the nearly 200,000 articles about health and medical topics accessed on desktop across 200 Wikipedia languages, so not all of the 300, but 200, attract more traffic than National Institutes of Health in the United States or WebMD. I know you're not supposed to look up what's wrong with you on WebMD, but I do trust the US National Institute of Health. And then in a smaller context, we also know that Wikipedia plays a really important role in localized context as well, where in 2014, Wikipedia played a very significant role in providing access across local languages to medical information on Ebola, which was often extracted by our editors from within the medical editing community from paywalled literature, making information about this disease available to those in West Africa who otherwise might not be able to access it. Moving nearer to the space that you all are in, Wikipedia is also used as a source of linked open data via projects like DBpedia and now Wikidata, and by a very large network of knowledge repositories. In fact, we're used extensively by virtually every platform that you use on a daily basis, like Google or YouTube or Facebook, by powering their search and knowledge graph backends. And well beyond the eyes of users, we inform the various ontologies and categories that often structure the way these entities do their work in terms of knowledge presentation. And we're ingested into varieties of different tools, including natural language processing and other machine learning applications as the data set for training. So, where does that put us all? Well, as we've perhaps awoken, I don't know if we've awoken to this, but we've awoken to the existence of an epistemic crisis in the world, or at least awoken to a world in which many people wish to convince us that we live in a world that has an epistemic crisis. It is obvious to me that Wikipedia is, or it is obvious to me that it is becoming more and more essential that there is a need for an infrastructure for trusted knowledge. That is a place that can signal the authenticity of claims and sources, which is independent and which can be relied upon at scale as a service, like a network of fact checkers, or perhaps a clearinghouse of provenance. And I'm arguing today, perhaps, that it might not be too much of a stretch to consider that Wikipedia, with all of our imperfections, has gone from it being the least trusted source in the room, the one that your teachers say, don't check that, definitely don't cite it, to perhaps being among the most. Served today as a kind of accidental epistemic backbone of the internet, constantly evolving and entirely driven in its policies and directions by a global community of volunteer contributors. It's that very human-powered emergent structure, interest, and language that reflects our changing discourse and shared social consensus faster than any machine could build it, and therefore so valuable to those very machines. I think of it often as I think often of the fact that in 2016 I walked into a room full of newspaper publishers who asked me, how is it possible that Wikipedia is so trusted? And I just sort of went, I don't know. Maybe because we start with the assumption that we're not. So in 2018, we're actually in this interesting position because while we perhaps have emerged into being in this space of being perhaps the accidental epistemic backbone of the internet, and we're in a position to draw a map of what is currently accessible on the web, who's created it and what it's about, we also now have the opportunity to draw a clearer picture or see a clearer picture of the knowledge that is represented today, which also means that it opens up the space for us to see the knowledge that isn't represented. I was thinking about how as we worry so much about machines being ever more capacious and sophisticated and what that means for our humanity, it's actually the case that machines' cold analysis of what we actually know or think that we do tells us quite a lot about whose humanity we've been considering all along. So as we're able to assess the world at scale, perhaps, the evaluation of our individual efforts as a collective outcome, we find that the results display clear gaps in terms of what we think of as knowledge equity, representation, and participation. And perhaps surprisingly to no one, these mere structural inequalities and inequities in the world of information at large. On English Wikipedia, you're looking at right there, the overwhelming majority of content is about the US and Western Europe, reflecting a persistent global north, actually I would call it just a transatlantic bias in content. And in other language Wikipedias, there are even greater gaps. So this is a visualization of the Arabic language Wikipedia, where it has geotagged content. And what you can see, first of all, I want to illustrate the fact that the Arabic language is one of the world's most spoken languages. It's in fact the 6th most spoken language by number of native speakers, with estimates ranging from anywhere from 300 to 400 million native speakers. Yet Arabic Wikipedia is actually only the 35th Wikipedia in terms of size. It has just over 600,000 articles. So there's a huge gap in terms of what's represented. And then on the internet as a whole, Arabic actually represents less than 1% of the content on the internet. So we're starting from a very, very small pool of a very, very large web, and then we're seeing that Wikipedia itself is actually quite small. And then the geotagged content of Arabic Wikipedia primarily represents Europe. So what's up with that? So at the very minimum, this to gaps outside of geographic regions, or gaps in translation, or gaps in access to information that exist in these impartial ways that are mapped differently across all of the different languages in which we create and share knowledge. Contributions across the entire continent of Africa are so low that there are actually more edits that originate in the country of the Netherlands than across the entire African continent combined. So just to give a point of reference, I believe the Netherlands currently has about 16 million citizens, maybe a little bit more. Dutch people in the room, correct me if I'm wrong. Whereas I believe that the African continent has more than 1 billion people who live across its more than 50 different countries. In fact, only about 1.2% of the edits to Wikipedia as a whole come from the entire continent of Africa, despite it being not just a home to more than 50 different countries, the birthplace of humanity, but also a place full of many hundreds, if not thousands of languages, thriving cultural, political, artistic, historic points of interest, and yet very, very little actually from Africans themselves. And in fact, that points to the fact that most of the articles about the continent of Africa are necessarily then written by editors outside of the continent. So it starts to make us ask the question of what does it mean to have, for a people to have their history, their knowledge, and their culture primarily written by outsiders. And of course, then that raises the question too of not just who's doing the writing, but from what sources. Because if the sources are all sources of, no offense to the Germans, but German anthropologists working in Namibia in translation who don't speak the language, how on earth does a Namibian read that and understand that to be a reflection of themselves? So who writes the content? Where does the content come from? Where does the sourcing originate? I was just in the Middle East, in Jordan, talking to a Jordanian editor who was telling me a current article that he's been working on. Not a single source is less than 100 years old. And of course, it's not just geography and it's not just language, it's also gender. And with gender dynamics and demographics across Wikipedia, the contrast is stark. The editing community as a whole is about 80% men, and the proportion of biographies of women across our various Wikipedia languages is generally fewer than 20%. Wikipedia editors do value neutrality. It's a core principle of what we do, but we also acknowledge that when people write about what they know and what they find familiar, sometimes implicit and often explicit bias skews how they treat content that might seem irrelevant or foreign to them. And of course, readers face gaps too. So even if you have access to all the information upon Wikipedia, what you'll often find is that 60% of our citations that exist are not free to read, which means that Wikipedia's promise as a starting point for learning, not the place to stop, but definitely the place to start, and for doing deeper research is actually stopped in more than 50% of cases by paywalls and toll access publishing. So are we there yet? A world in which every single human can freely share in the sum of all knowledge? My predecessor once referred to our vision as asymptotic. We'll never reach convergence with our goal. We see these issues, though, and we know we must do better. There's something quite noble about making steady progress against a goal that is vast and a long way off, but there's something quite worrisome about heading for a goal while leaving out half the world's population, history, and heritage. This is why on our 15th birthday, the Wikimedia movement, the Wikimedia communities, took a look at where we wanted to go and who we wanted to be. If we had built in this incredible encyclopedia over the course of the previous 15 years and yet still had quite a lot of work to do, what else might we need to do in order to get closer to that vision of a world in which every single human could freely share in the sum of all knowledge? Over the course of a year, we built ourselves a strategic direction, and that vision for Wikimedia's future, at least for the next 15 years or so, is really geared towards addressing and overcoming some of these gaps that I've just highlighted, and crucially, making an effort to do so without replicating the same biases. We have the strategic pillars of knowledge as a service and knowledge equity, which call on us to build the tools and the community and take down the barriers to participation to make Wikimedia, in fact, an essential infrastructure for free knowledge. An infrastructure for free knowledge that elevates all knowledge and is not just about the technical infrastructure, but also the community and the social infrastructure that makes this possible. So how do we get there? Well, you're part of it. The Wikimedia community's youngest and fastest growing project, Wikidata, presents what I believe to be a really compelling possible answer. Initially established to manage structured data for the Wikimedia projects, Wikidata is fast becoming a critical node in the broader linked open data web. More than 1/3 of its 50 million entries represent bibliographic data. This was the possibility that Wikicite first convened 2 years ago to explore. Could Wikimedia and the Wikimedia projects possibly have a central database for every source reference on the other Wikimedia projects? It was an audacious dream in and of itself. But in striving for such a thing, what might Wikidata and Wikicite also provide and serve a broader purpose for the web ecosystem? Could it also serve as an open infrastructure, that essential infrastructure for free knowledge, not just for the Wikimedia communities, but as a central reference point for libraries, publishers, scholarly disciplines, and the broader public? This morning, my colleague Dario spoke earlier about a missing piece of functionality on the web, which is a common way of pointing to a work. We have a web full of knowledge, but a web that remains exceedingly self-referential. I think of it a little bit as a parochial web, concerned primarily only with what is surrounding it in that digital space, and excluding so much of knowledge that exists outside of the realm of digitization. The web needs to find a way to point outside of itself, but while staying true to the best principles of open standards and governance. I'm actually not proposing that Wikidata solves this problem as we know and use it today. Like Wikipedia, Wikidata is a project of collected and curated available knowledge. It's a collection of statements and references. At its best, it's a balance some of the many assertions and perspectives and vantage points of our communities, but its scale and its purpose has some healthy and intentional limitations. But Wikibase, which is a little bit different, rather than Wikidata, may offer us the possibility of assembling the synthesis of knowledge in a more connected but also more distributed way. Much like Wikipedia runs on MediaWiki, the software, Wikibase is the open source software that powers Wikidata. And as a local data management tool, Wikidata is built for federation on open software using open standards. It lowers the barrier to producing and managing linked open data by making a small part of a larger ecosystem available for localized use. Wikidata offers the opportunity that we could all maintain in ways appropriate to our institutions and individuals, parts of our pieces of the bibliographic puzzle, including knowledge that has not traditionally sat comfortably or been welcomed in Western dominant narratives and epistemologies. Achieving this would require participation from many organizations, and often not just organizations, but many different entities, parties, and stakeholders, some of which are required, but either through matters of values and principles or through infrastructure and other limitations. They need the ability to maintain a certain amount of control over their data for quality reasons, for privacy reasons, or others. But Wikibase's inherent opportunity for federation, including the ability to push and pull throughout a network, can be used to encourage open data with local controls and customs. It offers us the chance to connect locally curated knowledge, mapped and shared, perhaps through Wikidata as a hub of hubs, many, many webs weaving together into a true bibliographic commons. I like to think of it as the web the way the web was meant to be, a web of knowledge connected to itself. But we certainly can't do this alone, and we recognize that. That gets back to what I was saying earlier. Organizations that share a vision with us and allies in the worlds of libraries and cultural heritage, as well as science all over the world, are potential collaborators in this open knowledge infrastructure. For example, pictured here is a timeline from this recently established Wikibase registry, which is actually a Wikibase of Wikibases, to get a little meta about it. Wikipedians love getting meta, which seeks to track all publicly declared Wikibase installations. It starts to map for us where our maps actually are. So I said earlier, we can't do it alone, and this is what I find so exciting about the potentiality of something like Wikibase, because we're not doing it alone. In fact, what we're doing is we're engaging with every other institution that shares a similar mission and a similar commitment to open knowledge. We're doing it for all of us. We're doing it for that web that was supposed to be. So the community that you're a part of as Wikicite and the broader Wikidata network is vital to fulfilling this vision not of Wikimedia, but just this vision of this world where we all have access and participatory access to knowledge. The community that you're part of is vibrant and growing, but also the project that we're bootstrapping is facing some real challenges and risks too. Well, Wikipedia has a CC by SA license, which requires attribution and sharing under equally open licenses. Wikidata is CC0. That means, getting nods, okay, checking. There is great reason, different audiences. There is great reason for this, because most general purpose factual data should be free. We start with that principle. And it is cumbersome to cite individual data points, and in many cases, these can't even be copyrighted, at least in the US. I don't want to talk about Europe right now. With CC0, thanks for the laughter. With CC0 licenses, anything goes, and the inputs are all invisible. The outputs can be taken and re-enclosed without any violation of the license. That is both a power, but also a fragility of the model. And it points to an imperative for this community to ensure that the products of your work, the tools and the data that you create, remain part of an open knowledge ecosystem. We value sharing well beyond the borders of our projects, but there is also this existential threat. As Jeff Builder and Cameron Nalon wrote in 2015, everything we have gained by opening content and data will be at risk if we allow the enclosure of knowledge infrastructures. Or, to cite a gentleman I recently spoke to on a panel in Argentina, open is open for appropriation. So as a movement that values free code, free data, free knowledge, and free people, we need to invest in community-created, open, collaborative infrastructure. With Wikicite, we have the seeds of a true bibliographic commons, open source and open data and open community. But it is critical that we create the tools, the partnerships, the messages, and the incentives that enable participants to join our open ecosystem and stay part of it, rather than the proprietary offshoots of it. There are parallels throughout scholarly communications, publishing, and open research realms. It has been shown time and time again through commercialization that if an ecosystem is not locked open, as Cory Doctorow says, that it is being always at risk of being locked closed. That is that the value that we create with open then ends up in the spaces of proprietary knowledge with value extraction that ultimately harms the open ecosystem upon which it is based. Wikidata will not change its CC0 license. That's part of what we believe. So how do we lock our data and our community and our ecosystem open? When core infrastructure and data are tied down under proprietary code, membership costs, or restrictive user agreements, the whole commons loses, which means we all lose. An open, healthy, thriving commons that continues to grow is an open, healthy, thriving commons with opportunity for all of us, but it has to be treated as a renewable resource and not one that is built for extraction. It is important for us to remember that not just how successful Wikimedia and Wikipedia have broadly been, but also how rare our movement is in a world that is still primarily under contract or license, behind a paywall, or restricted in myriad different ways. There are ways in which commercial players and vendors and corporations can be supportive parts of our movement, allies who help elevate and help expand, but we need to define and defend our ways of choosing and working with partners in order to lock knowledge open. Because open communities also thrive on networks of volunteers, and institutions that only take and do not give back we have to ask the question of them, are you truly members of the commons? Are you members of our community? In the framework of Paul Peters, the CEO of the open access publisher Hindawi says, the infrastructure of the commons needs to be open source, open data, open to integration, and open in transparency of its contracts. We can't enforce this either through policy or law, but we can expect it. We can make it part of our norms. We can encourage it. We can decide who and how we work with in order to maximize the potential that data is fed back into an open ecosystem for our benefit, certainly as community members, but for the benefit of all humanity, because that's really what that vision is all about. That's what we're here to do. Creating, no less maintaining this future, from our perspective, requires a multi-pronged effort. It means running the infrastructure of the commons through governance that is based on community, that is open, supporting the infrastructure of the commons through sustainable funding, and preserving community ownership of that commons for the assurance that it remains open. These should be the pillars of locking our projects open: governance, sustainability, and insurance. And as much as they're in our hands as the Wikimedia Foundation, they're also in your hands, because I like to remind everyone we don't own any of it. We don't own the content. We don't own the software. It's all open and it's owned by you. So it's up to us to make them shared, robust, and resilient. And I know that we can do it, because look at what you've built already. I want, as you're sitting here and as you go off to your drinks and dinners and enjoy yourselves and come back tomorrow feeling refreshed from that good night's sleep, I want you to imagine a network of linked and federated databases, each specializing in something: a type of art, a region's great music, a catalog of books, a subfield of scientific research. Imagine them sharing data back and forth through compatible data models and smart bots, full circle, with humans facilitating the aggregation and accuracy of the pieces as they originate from or pass through those hands. This is the ecosystem that we believe in, the ecosystem we need to build, to expand, and to protect. I encourage you to advocate for the needs of this shared space and push for the organizational buy-in in the communities in which you work across the range of institutions that share your vision, our vision. Because if we truly believe in the essential infrastructure of free knowledge, if we truly believe in a world in which every single human can freely share in the sum of all knowledge, it is about locking them open. And it's certainly not only the Wikimedia folks who are going to be able to do it. So please join us. We welcome you. Thank you.
Questions if you're up for it?
We'll find out.
Debates? I will bring the mic around for those. There we go. Any takers? Let it settle in for a minute. One back here.
Great talk. Thank you very much for doing that. It's very inspirational. And Mike is not yet up.
Oh, it should. Oh. This mic is on the fritz.
I can
Just
yell.
shout.
Just yell. I'll repeat.
So what's your take on net neutrality, when things just changing and, I'm a fan of this. I want it to continue, and I'm just wondering if you saw any fallout with some of the recent events.
Well, Governor Jerry Brown of the state of California recently signed a net neutrality bill into law here in California. So thanks, Jerry. Look, net neutrality for me is part of that essential infrastructure piece. It just operates a different layer of the stack. So if the web as a whole operates on multiple layers, what we really try to do at the content layer is just actually in some ways relatively superficial relative to the standards and the infrastructure on which it all operates. For me, net neutrality is an essential equity issue because it is about ensuring that people have equitable access to knowledge and information, and that there's shared opportunity for different players to enter into that space. And so at the Wikimedia Foundation, we do support net neutrality, and we'd like to see it roll something that is protected in more places and expanded in places where it doesn't exist. The context here in the US for those, because I know we have a very global audience, is that we did have some net neutrality protections that were rolled back under this current administration, and now there's an ongoing debate about where we go from here. So if you do live in a country in which net neutrality is the law of the land, continue to support it and advocate for it, because it is one of those things that is unsettled as of now in the broader policy discourse. And I personally believe quite essential to the open infrastructure of the web that is actually based on knowledge exchange as opposed to consumption.
So we're going to have to just project, but do you want us to call folks as they're raising hands? What do you see? I think we have one right here in the center.
I'm just wondering, does this represent a change in the Foundation's position from years past? Because I remember one particular quote where a spokesperson for the Foundation said that, quote, "We believe in net neutrality in the United States," something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that, this is now a net neutrality discussion, so, as long as people are cool with that, we can keep it up, but we can also change the subject. So that, I think, was reflective of a time in which the Wikimedia Foundation had a project called Wikipedia Zero, which was a zero-rated data project in order to make Wikipedia free to users across the world for whom cost of access to data was prohibitive in terms of accessing free knowledge. We wanted knowledge to not just be free in terms of licenses and free to use, but also free to literally access. And I think that in part that was in dialogue with our communities about what people's needs were in different places and countries. We have shifted, I think, to a commitment to net neutrality over the course of recent years, and I think that's the right and good place for us to be.
Time for a couple more.
Yeah, great talk. Quick question on that. I like that part at the end about the community ownership and sustainable funding. So sustainability and community ownership, but basically, what do you do when those two things sort of start to get in tension with one another? Basically, I've developed a number of tools. Sometimes they get kind of popular, right? And they get a little bit out of my ability to sustain them, So how does the foundation take things over from there, maybe?
I think one of the ways the foundation has been incredibly fortunate is that the community of Wikipedia users supports the the Wikimedia project. So just today, our annual big fundraising drive launched. You may have gotten an email, probably from me. Thank you for your $10 donation. But that has actually meant that we're in this really unique place where we are able to be sustainable in terms of our fundraising model, because we're sustained by our users, and the users are also what I think is our part of our broader community. I do believe that there are ways for all organizations to think about how you create clarity around governance, being community-driven, open, and transparent, and how you create clarity around the resources that you use and accept in order to get work done. I personally don't believe that money in and of itself is necessarily compromising, as long as you have clear controls and transparency over how it's used. And what we do in the Wikimedia community, and sometimes we do it better and sometimes we do it less well, is try to be very transparent about how those funds are used, including publishing our budgets and our program goals and all of that. So it's open to essentially public audit. And I think that that's the sort of thing, like, what are your standards for accepting funds? How do you use them? How do you use them, and do they create value in the end? That being sort of a separate structure from how are you governed and what's your intention and your values, so people can hold you to account on both. That's what I don't know if that answers your question. We can talk more.
One or two more from the back.
Hey, so very good talk. I was very impressed with all of it, and I guess just because the opportunity is so rare, I want to ask you something that's kind of adjacent to it and maybe a little bit challenging.
Net neutrality.
Actually, it's not net neutrality.
No, it's okay. I like net neutrality too.
Over the years, it seems that the Wikimedia, so this is specifically, I think, because we have such an interesting mix of Wikimedians and people involved in organizations that are collaborating with Wikipedia and Wikimedia. So over the years, it seems that the Wikimedia Foundation has had sort of an evolving approach to its role in terms of funding things like Wikimedians in Residence and GLAM projects generally and things like that. Personally, I've generally felt that it's maybe healthier for the foundation to kind of cultivate a world in which different funders are funding projects kind of independently rather than the foundation being a central hub. But I think there have been a lot of different views about that over the years, and I'm curious if you could give a bit of an update of what that looks like now.
Yeah, I think I am a big believer in funding diversification, and one of the interests, and I'm sorry, because I think this is sort of like a Wikipedia 202 or 102 question. It's been a while since I've been in college. I don't know how the numbers work, but I think this is sort of an advanced level Wikimedia question, and so forgive me, I'm going to provide some context. So the Wikimedia Foundation sets aside between 8 to 10% of the funds raised in the course of a year to fund other Wikimedia institutions around the globe that do varieties of different things, including events like these, although this is, I don't think, an affiliate-run event, but gets people together, hosts editathons, they do outreach, partnerships, things like that, do policy work. And I think the question was, should that funding still remain fairly centralized or be decentralized? It's my belief, personally, that one of the really unusual things about the way that Wikimedia Foundation works is that we are supported by users for the most part. About 6 or 7 million people a year donate an average of $15, which is remarkable because it allows us to maintain that independence, but also creates a way to pass those funds through to those other affiliate organizations. But one of the places that we are not, to me at least this makes sense, we don't tend to raise money from large philanthropic institutions because the organization does not do direct work in a traditional programmatic sense. But what is really cool about the way that the community has grown is a lot of the community work is directly programmatic, working with libraries, working with museum institutions, working with local communities around language preservation, working to do documentation of any number of different things. And as it turns out, there's a lot of appetite for that sort of support in the more traditional philanthropic space. And so I am a big believer that the more sustainable our funding sources are in terms of being diversified and distributed, the more sustainable our community is as a whole. So I would actually love for us in the future to find ways to develop the capacity across the broader global community to be able to raise funds for the programs and projects in which they work. More directly, because I think that opens up a lot more opportunity. But that's my personal perspective, and like all things Wikimedia, I think that would be subject to community conversation. So.
is a good reminder to thank once again the Stone Foundation for making this.
Yes.
One more?
Yeah.
One more, or should we wrap?
All right, I look to Marley.
Timekeepers? You can sure. I think we're gonna, with that vision of diversifying funding and full coffers for open knowledge, maybe we'll and a couple housekeeping questions. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is the end of day one, which was our scene setting day. Tomorrow, we have Phoebe is going to kick us off. So the doors will be open here at 8 o'clock, and we'll have coffee and tea and community with one another until 9 o'clock, when we'll start with a kickoff talk by Phoebe, which will help move us into the strategy portion of the day. But the day is really choose your own adventure, right? We have some Wikidata tutorials, a track of those. And then you can also join us in some structured conversations that will help move that small, medium, and extra large vision statements of Wikicite's future forward. We also have lightning talks, the most popular format of the emerging Wikisite program features. Remember that the organizing committee sees all and hears all, but only if you tell us. So if there are things that we can improve, please let us know individually. Send a note to the Wikisite list. We're all subscribed to that. Or the Wikisite email address, I should say, wikisite@wikimedia.org. And Code of Conduct Committee also, if there have been any problems or issues with that, if there's anything that's nagging at you, please speak to the people who are on the Code of Conduct Committee or send an email to that email address. So that's it for today. You have choose your own adventure for this evening, 2 options, or roll your own. This is the land of wonderful food and drinks, so we will see you back here tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
I've memorized these 8 minutes exactly
I'm heading off pretty damn soon, so I'll keep you.
Okay, that's all right. I thought you knew that. No, I somewhere.
Thank you. Okay, sounds good. Mark, do we need to give you a list of what This would be great. I
imagine you're aware of
the I'd say a bump that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think you have to do yeah, I'm guessing it was something that late now. I'm going to pack. Actually, I would like, Andrew, if you have that. So the book that Joseph called Matthews are working on. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes. No. Yeah, exactly. Sounded wrong. Anyway, it's been just sort of increasingly on my mind that like it's not the main thing I wanted to do, so I didn't propose it. But it seems like it's really important that someone should write something like a signpost. And I don't know if like all their I mean, whatever. Yeah, like the history of the signpost is important in the Wikipedia world. There's a very few of us who sort of have the background to.
There's the very few that are just like little snippets of
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's like Yeah. I could never get Michael. I mean, I don't know. He was on to bigger and busier things, but maybe for a specific purpose like that.
Wikimedia.
Yeah.
Go to Wikimedia. I thought he was on the leaderboard with you guys. Oh, really? Oh, wow. I knew he wasn't like top tier.
I mean, it's like a oral history or like a collaborative project of all, like I don't know. It just seems like yeah.
This kind of thing, like everyone's community media is just like, oh, it's one of those things like everybody says this idea. Literally nothing.
I mean, this is one of those things too. Like I bet I was super interested in the question of like I would love to know what every editor or heavy contributor assessment is of like what the core issues for the site. Would we all say the same? Would we say variations on a theme? I'm sure. Yeah, but like that would be like just like a couple paragraphs. Editor and people like Tony would just be on it.
There's some people who like have to post like
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's people like Tony who's been a pillar of it from chunks of it.
So I don't know. Maybe I'll. I've been kind of meaning to shoot an email and see. I don't know what their overall deadline is. Like, right? Because I think what they probably sent us was like pre-deadline. I think they're maybe still open for general submission.
I wonder if it's pretty flexible.
Yeah. I think I've only met him like once. I've talked to like Joseph. I know a little better. It did, yeah. And it's not like I mean, I wanted to even want to submit it. Like, you know what I mean? Like for myself.
But you didn't submit something about signpost.
I didn't submit something about signpost, so I'm kind of regretting it. It's kind of why I'm bringing. I feel like
Be open if someone sharing.
Yeah.
About signpost.
Right. Have someone else propose this. I mean, if somebody's already working on it, then that's great.
I have a feeling because Regal used signposts so much for his book research, he'd be very sympathetic to that. Honestly, But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the deadline is.
Quite like honestly, it would be like even with all the reading in the archives and stuff that I tried to do when I was so involved, I still feel like I only have the